France, a land known for its rich history, stunning landscapes, and exquisite cuisine, is also home to some of the most intriguing UFO encounters in history. In this article, we'll take a closer look at 3 remarkable stories that have captivated the hearts and minds of UFO enthusiasts worldwide. Our first story takes place in the summer of 1944, when 13-year-old Madeleine Arnoux was on a bicycle ride to pick up food from a nearby farm. During a brief rest in a meadow, she stumbled upon a strange metallic craft and tiny humanoid creatures dressed in brown one-piece suits. Frozen in fear, Madeleine eventually fled the scene, keeping her encounter a secret for nearly 30 years, before finally sharing her story with the world. Fast forward to 1954, when railway worker Marius de Wilde experienced a chilling encounter near his home in Nord, France. One night, his dog's incessant barking led him to discover a strange object and 2 small humanoid figures near the railroad tracks. Paralyzed by a beam of light from the object, Marius helplessly watched as the beings boarded their craft and ascended into the night sky. In the aftermath of the incident, investigators discovered physical evidence supporting Marius's account, solidifying his place in UFO history. Our final story takes us to the picturesque region of Valensole, France, where farmer Maurice Massé had a close encounter of the third kind in July 1965. While taking a cigarette break, Massé noticed an oval-shaped object landing in a nearby lavender field, accompanied by 2 humanoid figures. When one of the figures raised a cylindrical device, Massé was struck by a beam that left him paralyzed on the ground. As the figures boarded their craft and flew away, they left behind physical evidence that would later support Massé's incredible story. These 3 extraordinary encounters serve as a testament to the enduring mystery and allure of the UFOs in France and beyond. As we continue to explore the vast expanse of the universe, stories like these remind us that we may not be alone and that the truth, as they say, is out there. During the summer of 1944 in rural France, 13-year-old Madeleine Arnoux was going about her business on a hot afternoon, going to pick up some food at a nearby farm. Also note that this was right around World War II, so some sources considered that this may have been black market food she was picking up. In the sweltering heat, Madeleine was riding her bicycle, pedaling harder and harder to get there quickly, so she could make this trip in the sun over as quickly as possible. However, she hit a point where she felt exhausted, likely due to the heat, and noticed there was a nearby meadow that bordered the woods on her biking path. So she decided, what harm would it be to take a small break, cool down in some shade from the trees, and pick a few berries. The berries weren't quite as readily available as she had hoped, but seeking them out, she began making her way down a trail that led off into the trees. At this point, curiosity got the best of her. She kept walking and walking, forgetting about the berries, and now found herself more entranced by following this path. The trail veered off and disappeared around a bend through the trees. As she reached the curve, it was at this point that she noticed something incredibly strange. Madeleine claimed that sitting just a few hundred meters away was something she had never seen before. It was something gray, round and metallic, something around the size of a standard car. She described the outer layer of this craft as appearing very smooth and having no visible openings, doors, or windows. As she was studying the spacecraft, something moved and caught her eye. She realized she was not alone in these woods. Surrounding this craft were tiny humanoid creatures. She claims they were only about 1 meter or so tall and dressed in brown one-piece suits. Here is a quote from Madeleine herself. "They did not make any gesture in my direction, and as to me, I was frozen on the spot. How much time did this mutual observation last? I cannot say, but I remember the oppressive atmosphere, still worsened by the thundery weather and my impression of being unable to move. Suddenly I managed to react and wanted to pick up my bicycle again, which lay within a few meters. The time to bend down, and by looking up at the strange appearance, again, there was nothing there. Only at this place the trees were agitated by a violent wind. I did not think of looking up in the air, where I would have undoubtedly still seen the machine, which flew away. So understandably at this point, she was pretty freaked out and terrified. She's trying to get away from the spacecraft and those strange creatures at this point. At the time, she feared that no one would believe her. Her friends wouldn't believe her, her parents. So what's the point of telling anyone at all? Just so they can make fun of her or worry about her well-being? She ended up keeping this encounter to herself for many years, trying her best to repress and forget it ever happened. At the time, being so young, and also in the 1940s when X-Files and Invader Zim weren't around, she wasn't readily connecting the dots to aliens the way a lot of people likely would today. She actually had no idea what a UFO was. To her, it was just a strange and otherworldly experience. Eventually, as she grew older and wiser, she learned more about UFO phenomenon and realized that many of those stories and descriptions matched her experience to a T. Here's another quote from Madeline. "A long time ago, I thought of the strange encounter, and then I forgot it. It was necessary that one started to speak about the flying saucers for me to make a link, and I think that I had undoubtedly seen one of these mysterious UFOs. After so many years, the image is still very clear in my memory. I know that I had not dreamed, and that what I saw in the woods that day was nothing known. It could not have been a vehicle at that time. Moreover, they were rather rare, so I undoubtedly identified it. The place of the encounter was deserted. The way leads into the wood, and the closest farms are 1 kilometer away. We were in 1944, and the men of the resistance were numerous in the area, but it could not have been any of them. Neither German soldiers, and undoubtedly one or the others, would have called me. It is thus necessary to think that I witnessed one of the first visits of UFOs." So almost 30 years after her berry-picking UFO experience, she wrote a letter to a ufologist named Ferdinand Lagarde. Her experience that she detailed in the letter ended up being published in the French ufology magazine Lumières dans la Nuit. While she received some feedback mail, no one ever visited Madeline or went to her property to investigate, probably because the experience was almost 30 years old. But here is another quote from Madeline. "Whereas I received quite a lot of mail after the publication of the article in question, all the magazines treating the matter at the time in 1972 wrote to me to interrogate me and to ask me the report of the facts. I was even told that a young man of Toulon-en-Arroux, studying with the UCLA, University of Los Angeles, a few years later, had read my article in an American magazine, in the very library of this prestigious university. But it seems that my modest person did not interest the investigators, for nobody came to my home. It is quite possible that some journalists came on the spot, but they never met me. I went back to the place myself 10 years ago. Everything was changed, and if I had not had this true photographic impression of the scene of July 44 in my memory, I could not have recognized anything." It seems that she wanted the clout. In 1996, she apparently contacted a different ufologist, Michael Fugit, and claimed that there was actually another possible UFO sighting in 1942 in Toulon-en-Arroux. Here is what she wrote to Michael. "I might add something all the same to bring back facts that came back to my memory after the publication of the article, which perhaps does not have any relationship with the occurrence, but which are rather odd. A few years before, in the first years of the war perhaps, in 1942, the Germans occupied Toulon-en-Arroux, rather peacefully, it should be acknowledged. Almost every evening during the summer, I think, for the evenings were beautiful and tepid, and for several days in a row the district where I lived with my parents, the suburb, was in agitation. Indeed, we managed to observe the whitish gleam slightly shining, a dull moon, in the sky roughly at a point located in the northwest. This gleam was motionless, sometimes seemed to die out a little, then revived. Needless to say, each evening there was a gathering of all the district, and everyone went on with their comments and guesses, admittedly compromising only tethered balloons, a zeppelin, memory of another war, Allied or enemy observation, I know that courageous young men went in the day to check the surroundings and never saw anything. Now I am about sure that in Straight Line, the place where we could see this luminous and fixed object was located at the vertical of the place where I saw, a few years later, my UFO. So was there a connection between these occurrences? Did they observe us already from above before trying the landing? Over the years, Madeleine has discounted those who have wondered whether she may have seen German soldiers, perhaps members of the French resistance, or even that she imagined the whole incident, stating that had it been soldiers or resistance members whom she had encountered relatively frequently, they would have approached her. It was a cool September evening in 1954 when Marius de Wilde, a dedicated railway worker, was setting in for the night at his home near a railway station in Nord, France. While preparing for sleep, he had no idea how remarkable this evening would be. Right around 10:30 p.m., Marius's faithful dog began to bark hysterically. This was very unusual of his pup, according to Marius. At first, Marius tried to ignore the commotion, but as the barking persisted, he knew something was going on. He groggily got out of bed, grabbed his flashlight, and ventured outside to see what was going on, not really expecting to find much other than maybe a stray cat or some other animal running around. As he approached the tracks, just about 6 or 7 meters away, he spotted a strange-looking object near the railroad tracks. Not only did he see something, but he heard something too. Footsteps behind him. Swinging his flashlight around, he came face to face with 2 small humanoid figures, each standing between 80 centimeters and 1 meter tall. Their heads, when illuminated by the flashlight, reflected the light as if they were wearing mirror helmets. Before Marius could react, a beam of light shot out from the object on the tracks, absolutely paralyzing him. Completely frozen, unable to move at all, similar to Pascagoula, if I remember correctly. He also noticed while paralyzed that his flashlight flickered and then completely died, as if the batteries had suddenly been drained. Helplessly, he watched as a door opened on the object behind him, and the mysterious beings boarded the craft. As it ascended into the night sky, the object changed colors, leaving Marius awestruck despite his horrifying situation. A few moments later, his body was released. When he finally regained his mobility, he rushed to tell his wife and neighbor, in that order, about his incredible encounter, but they had neither seen nor heard a thing. Desperate for someone to believe him, Marius contacted the local police. To his surprise, when the officers arrived at the scene, they found Marius unable to approach the exact spot where the event had occurred, as it made him feel ill. This, along with the fact that his flashlight and telephone had stopped working, convinced the officers that Marius's story was no hoax. So just to reiterate, Marius legitimately fell ill when he approached the spot where he had frozen, and additionally his flashlight and telephone completely stopped working. As dawn broke, investigators swarmed the area. A passing train came to a screeching halt when it produced an unusually loud noise at the site of the encounter. Upon closer inspection, a 6-meter depression was discovered on the exact spot where the object had landed, likely the cause of the strange sound. The small rocks beneath the train tracks were found to be carbonized, and the sleepers between the steel lines bore symmetric marks. The incident quickly gained notoriety, thanks to the local magazine Radar. Within days of his initial experience, he found himself surrounded by government investigators, the press, and inquisitive onlookers. However, the story didn't end there. In the days that followed, Marius suffered from respiratory problems, and tragically, his dog died just 3 days after the encounter. In July 1965, a very weird series of events occurred. It all started near a small village of Valensole, France. On July 1st, 1965, a farmer named Maurice Masset was taking a cigarette break before starting his morning chores. As he puffed out whiffs of smoke into the air, something caught his attention through the haze. of the cigarette smoke, and he could see some sort of strange object descend from the sky to land in a field of lavender flowers not too far away. At this point, he did not take it to be a UFO, thinking it instead to be a helicopter, but when he extinguished his smoke and took a look out across the field, his eyes met with an oval-shaped object perched up on four-leg-like apparatuses. Stranger still was that there appeared to be two humanoid figures standing in front of it. The figures were described as standing approximately 4 feet high and dressed in tight gray-green clothes, seemingly unrelated to humans. Their heads were oversized and bald, holding within them large almond-shaped eyes and a small pointed chin, and they seemed to be making some sort of low grumbling noise. As the farmer stood there, mouth agape in awe, one of these curious figures allegedly turned to him and raised into the air a device that looked like a cylindrical or pencil-like in nature. Before Massey could even really register what was going on, he says that the device projected some sort of beam that caused him to lose all control of his limbs and go crumpling to the ground in a heap. He would claim that as he lay there in a daze, the figures boarded their craft and then flew off at great speed. At a later time, it was discovered that the ground had a deep indentation in it and a hardened area like concrete. It would also be found that Massey was honest, very sincere, and was considered to be telling the truth. Was France the center of unidentified flying object sightings? Did Marius de Wilde, Maurice Massey, and Madeleine Arnoux have an alien encounter? The final encounter of the witness Marius de Wilde, his other encounter which occurred on October 10th of the same year. It was between 11:30 and noon, Marius told me, when my 3.5-year-old son came to warn me that there was a car on the track. I went outside and saw 15 meters away a craft of the same shape and dimensions as the one I saw a month earlier. It was not on the same track, but on one that passes on the other side of the house. There was a rectangular opening at the base of the dome of the craft. All around this base was a series of bumps, whose meaning I did not understand. A fifth emerged through the opening, descended to the ground, and spoke to the others. He seemed to be the leader. There was also above the opening a horizontal row of portals. I distinguished 3 or 4, but saw nothing through them. The figures had human appearance, dressed in a dark gray suit that enveloped them completely, and were busy around the craft. There were 2 on the disc platforms, one on each side of the rectangular opening. Later I saw 2 others come out from under the disc, or from more precisely, underneath. I had not stopped advancing towards the craft while making these observations, so we met about 3 meters from the craft. The being in front of me was 1.10 meters tall. He gave me the impression of being small, but not a dwarf. He was entirely clad in what appeared to be a waterproof one-piece suit with a helmet, featuring a transparent part in front of the face. Gloves and shoes, all made of a flexible dark matte gray material, which could have been waterproof fabric, plastic, or rubber. A bulge descended vertically from under his right arm to mid-thigh. Through the transparent part of the soft helmet I could see his face, part of his ears, and the start of his hair. His general appearance was Asian Mongolian. His jaw was quite strong, with high cheekbones, very dark hair, and eyebrows with brown eyes. His skin was fairly brown, that of a white man with a tan, not pinkish but tan somewhat comparable to that of Arabs, darker in the places where we have beard, no mustache, eyes not protruding. The being patted my son, whom I held in my arms, tapped me on the shoulder with a smile and began to speak to me in a language I did not know. He seemed annoyed that I did not understand him. I could hear him very well, which is quite curious, since he was speaking to me through his helmet. I saw that he had very white, impeccable teeth. Overall, his face was regular, clear, truly beautiful. His smile was completely human, as were his facial expressions and gestures. The beings around the craft similar to him, whom I glimpsed, also smiled occasionally. I was 3 meters from the craft, and could hear faint murmurs from inside. It seemed to me that I heard repeated, "Balcock, Balcock." Looking through the opening, I saw two other beings, one lying on the ground. I assumed it was him who was groaning, and the other standing beside him. Since I was almost in line with the door, I could glimpse inside a brick-like material that was truly strange. Numerous small things, buttons of different colors, some type of pressure gauges, etc. In this dark grayish metal, impeccably clean. The language that was spoken to me apparently was neither Chinese, nor an Indo-Chinese language, nor Siamese. The sequence of sounds seemed more European to me, but it was not, in my opinion, English-German, or any Roman language. I am truly unable to specify further, not being familiar at all with foreign languages. The being took a few steps towards one of my poultry, which was pecking nearby. He bent down and grabbed one of the hens. Instead of fleeing and squawking, as these animals usually do when I try to catch them, and allowed itself to be taken peacefully, I was astonished. Holding it in his hands, he showed it to me, and then gave it to the two beings who had remained near the door. They took it, bending down slightly. Finally, the being stroked my child again on the head, tapped me on the shoulder again kindly, then gestured for me to step aside. He climbed into the craft, preceded by the two individuals, to whom he had handed the hen, and followed by the other two who had been under the craft a moment before. Two of them helped them climb in by giving them their hands. The figure standing inside had bent down to move the one lying down to clear the entrance. Watching them move like this, I noticed they were well proportioned, with a relaxed manner, and despite being subject to gravity, they did not seem to experience its weight or experience fatigue. A panel close to the door, sliding from top to bottom, quite quickly but gently, had closed. Then the craft took off vertically, silently and without smoke, and disappeared towards the east. I had time to glimpse the underside of the disk. There was a raised central part surrounded by small circles and lines arranged in spokes. I was not very inclined to reveal this observation, remembering the trouble the first had caused me. But my wife could not help but mention it, and word got out, which brought another wave of investigators to the scene. Indeed, this was an amazing encounter that really complemented the other two encounters that he had had. What did Marius de Wilde see and experience all those years ago? Were these humanoids the same ones that he had encountered earlier that year? The secret seemed to remain with him. Perhaps there is a connection to these visitors that extends deep into the humanity's past that can't be revealed until a foreseeable future when we are ready and can truly understand it.